Do this. The Cult of Hockey podcast by the faithful and for the faithful. I'm David Staples of the Edmonton Journal, and I'm today with Bruce McCurdy. Hey, Bruce.
Hey, David, how are you doing today?
Good, good. Slowly recovering from all my beer league hockey injuries. Bad knee, bad thumb, bad hip. Nothing like playing hockey to get banged up. I can't imagine the pain and suffering that NHL players go through during an NHL hockey playoff. It just must be immense. Just immense. So
You sound like the Colorado Avalanche injury list in one person.
yeah, but all minor, like little minor aches and pains with me. For those guys, they're playing with major stuff. Like it's
Did you see Valerie Nichushkin's X-ray?
no.
His whole foot is bashed in. His broken toe, or his big toe, is broken right in the middle. They blocked a shot in Game 5, and then in Game 6, they said he needed medical assistance to put his skate on, and all he did was play 23 minutes.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Medical assistance, like a doctor.
To get his skate on was how they worded it. So.
Alrighty, we're going to talk about some off-season stuff, Bruce, because with the Colorado Avalanche winning the Stanley Cup, congratulations to that fantastic hockey team. The Oilers are now, we're now in the NHL's off-season. Trades can start to happen. We're going to start to see some trades. We're going to, the draft's coming up on the 7th of July. When is free agency? Is that the 13th of July for agency?
13th, yeah. Buyout window opens on July 1st. That's a big one.
And there's all kinds of rumors. July 1st buyout window, that's a big one, as you say. So there's all kinds of rumors. Today we're going to talk about a number of them. We're going to talk about the possibility that Evander Kane will be traded to the Edmonton Oilers. We will talk about the possibility of Duncan Keith re-signing with the Edmonton Oilers. And we will talk about the possibility of Stuart Skinner having to leave the Edmonton Oilers because of contractual demands that the Oilers might be having to fulfill based on signings they make this summer. This is down the road with Skinner. We'll also look at keep, hold, or fold with two Edmonton Oilers wingers, Zack Cassian and Warren Fogel. So that's on the agenda. Let's start with the Evander Kane rumor, Bruce. So this came up. Mark Spector was talking about it. This was his, as he put it, a theory. Mm-hmm. My theory about NHL insiders having theories is that they talk to people who know what might be coming up, and it's then presented as a theory. That's just complete speculation on my part, though. I have no idea that that's what's gone on here, but so the theory, Mark Spector's theory is that the NHL wants to avoid arbitration. They feel, I think the feeling is that San Jose's case might not be great, and that they're not going to be able to avoid this contract, so they're going to be stuck with the contract. And the NHL doesn't want a ruling. The idea is they don't want to have a precedent set by this situation. They just rather it be dealt with beforehand. So they've done a number of things. They've pushed the arbitration hearing I don't think there's not a date listed yet. They say the arbitrator's not available till well after July 13th, till free agency starts, which puts Kane in a tough position because if he's going to sign with another team, they need cap space. The teams are going to rapidly use their cap space on other players. So he's suddenly in a situation where the list of potential destinations goes way down. Now, if for San Jose, there's also incentive to make a deal, because if their position is weak, Bruce, they could lose the case, and then they have Kane late July on his cap hit on his existing contract, and I think it's an all or nothing proposition where they either have to live with the contract as it is, the contract stands, or it's void. And if it's void, they don't own him anything, and he's a UFA. So Kane could be a UFA at the end of July, where there's a lot fewer teams to go to. Or San Jose could have his contract, $7 million a year, which they then that presumably they don't want Kane, and they'd have to trade it, which is also harder for San Jose to do at the time because all the other teams have followed their plans. So maybe the theory that Spector has is they're going to trade Kane beforehand. And this could happen anytime now, I guess. And this might involve San Jose retaining some of Kane's. He's got 3 years left at $7 million, retaining something of that, although they're in a much better position to trade that contract now, Kane having played so well. 3 years at $7 million is actually kind of a good idea. Like it suddenly, looks like a good idea with Kane. Better 3 years of Kane at $7 million, because on the open market, maybe you can get $6 million for 5 years or $6.5 million for 5 years. Like he could be a lot more expensive on the open market. So that contract doesn't look so bad, and a team might want to trade for it. I think Bob Stauffer said, if I'm not mistaken, that the only way the Oilers are going to be able to get Kane is in a trade like this. So, because I think then the term makes sense for them. Cap hits a little harder, but what it would mean is the Oilers would trade players to San Jose. They'd give up They'd give up players with contracts and then fill in that space. So, the Oilers have Kassian at $3.2 million. They have Fogel at $2.75 million, both for the next 2 years. They have Jesse Puljujärvi, who's got a contract coming up. And apparently the fear is, the Oilers might be happy to get Puljujärvi at $2 million or $2.5 million a year, but they're worried about him going to arbitration, and because of his fancy stats, maybe getting $3.5 or $4 million, something like that they can't afford. So all these players' names, Spector brought up in theory as potential people that can go to San Jose, and also Tyson Barrie in return for, one or more of them in return for Evander Kane. There's Cat Stevens. So that's the theory, Bruce. What do you make of it?
Yeah, well, there's very little bit I don't know to comment too knowledgeably on it, but if San Jose and Kane were to come to some kind of settlement, one possible outcome, San Jose stopped paying this guy on January the 9th, and that's when the Oilers picked him up. And he wound up, leaving money on the table because he was supposed to get a $7 million contract, and they stopped paying him on January 9th after he spent a chunk of time on the suspended list before that. And here in Edmonton, he made, relatively speaking, chump change. So there may have to be some financial recompense.
Yes.
But beyond that, a reinstatement of that contract, 3 years at $7 million cap hit, $19 million in real money owing to him, in escrow money, Bettman bucks. But he's got, that's at least something approaching fair value that you could at least see the players saying, reinstatement is worthwhile. But the chances of him signing with San Jose and going back to that team strike me as being close to zero. There was
he's not signing there again. No, he's not signing.
About his teammates and, what was going on there. It's enough bad blood that the only way for them to do that is sort of to settle and trade. It's a new style of trade. We used to have sign and trade. Now we have settle and trade. And his contract has a modified no trade where he submits a list of 3 teams he can be traded to.
Correct.
And presumably he could revise those list of 3 teams at such time as the settlement was reached. But he could sort of, I think, almost pick his destination. And I'd have to think that if he was picking 3 teams, that Edmonton could well be one of them based on his positive experience here. So it's feasible. And whether San Jose, in moving on, would retain some cap or take something back, something expensive back, as well as some other kind of asset to make the trade work from Edmonton's perspective, who's to know? It would be a complicated and messy deal, to say the least.
I think they'd be probably thrilled to get Jesse Puljujärvi for Evander Kane. That would be a huge win for them. Like, they were willing to eat salary and give up Kane for with eating half his salary, I think, when they were trying to move him in the winter time. So to not have to eat any or part, hardly any of his contract in terms of retaining cap hit, and getting a good player like Puljujarvi, they'd be over the moon. I'd think. Now, we don't know what the deal is or what the suggestion is, like what the Oilers are talking about. And I also don't know one thing, like, can San Jose just say, okay, we've changed our minds. We're not voiding the contract.
Mm-hmm.
We're just trading it. We're trading them.
Right.
And can they just do that? And I don't know.
So.
I don't know that. Do they need actually, because they took this action then to actually come to a settlement with him? So then the ball's in Kane's court. And you'd think what Kane might be thinking as well, just settle and make me a free agent.
Yes.
Might be what he would want.
Mm-hmm.
So then it's unlikely that the Oilers can trade for his contract. It seems to me Kane's interest here is settle with San Jose, get whatever money is owing to him for this past year, and then become a UFA. Like that's what so if San Jose just can't trade that contract, which would be in their interest, or maybe they can, Bruce. Maybe they can just make good on what they didn't pay him this year and pay that up and then trade the contract the last 3 years. So these are some unknowns in this whole situation that I don't get, and I don't know the answer to those questions. So they have two different interests in terms of settling. With Kane probably wanted to be a UFA, and San Jose, if they've made up their mind to move before the arbitration, wanting to trade the contract because the contract's actually not a bad contract and you can get value back in return for it. So
it's certainly worth more today than it was on January 9th.
I think a lot of teams
they couldn't retain and trade it because his reputation was sewered at that point, and he went some way to rehabilitating that during his time in Edmonton. I mean, there are background issues that are going to remain there, on his record, certainly. But what he did while he was in Edmonton was, there was nothing negative that I heard of other than getting suspended for the last playoff game, which was not a good look. But his contract, such as it is, that remains 3 years, is I wouldn't want to go any longer with that guy. Let's put it that way. But I don't think it's out of line with his on ice value. And the question is, it returns again to the off ice stuff and how much stock you put on that. And the Oilers have already demonstrated that they're prepared to move past it.
Yeah, I mean, could Kane get more than 3 years at $7 million on the open market? Could he get $7 million on the open market? He might. They may have kind of sussed that out with other teams by now. I don't know how that works, but they might have an idea about that. It's an interesting situation, Bruce. I've gone from thinking he's not coming back to thinking, well, there's seems like there's a chance. Seems like there's maybe a decent chance this is going to happen. So it seems like it's being talked about in real terms now among the sports writers like Spector and on Oilers Now, and the people who regularly talk to Oilers management and the agents and have a sense of this. Although, John Shannon was on, and he, another NHL insider, and he was definitely talking about Kane as a UFA rather than this proposition of a trade. So who knows where we're at with it. There's another one that's come up, Bruce, trading Duncan Keith's contract to a team which needs to get to the cap floor. Why don't you describe what this scenario looks like in terms of the Oilers being creative with players and cap space and contracts?
Yeah, this was brought up a couple of times on Jason Greger's show on TSN 1260 yesterday about possibility of a trade that would kind of work for both teams, of the Oilers trading the last year of Duncan Keith's contract to a team below the cap floor, with Arizona the dumping ground of contracts around the NHL that somehow is still below the cap floor, apparently. Accepting him in the trade, turning around and buying him out, thus making him a free agent, with the thinking being that the Oilers could then re-sign him as a free agent at a similar contract as the cash value on his old one, and this is the key to the thing, is that he's only owed $1.5 million in real money next year, whereas his cap hit is $5.5 million. That's a huge disparity. Whereas if they trade that to Arizona, the buyout would only cost Arizona 2/3 of that 1.5 million. It would cost them $1 million, 2 years, $500,000 a year to pay the guy out. So relatively speaking, pocket change, and by adding the dead cap to their space next year would potentially help them reach the cap floor. So it's not like there's nothing in it for Arizona, but there would need to be more in it for Arizona to accommodate the Oilers. They'd be wanting draft picks or a young player or something of value to make that trade. And the player who has a no trade clause, it would have to be in his interest as well. That, I mean, he'd be getting the extra $1 million from Arizona that he might come back and sign for. I think it would take at least the full 1.5, if not 2 million, or maybe a 2-year deal. I mean, there's different ways to sweeten the pot from the player's perspective. But at the same time, bring down that crippling cap hit by $3 or $4 million. That would be a big win for the Oilers if they were able to pull that off at a reasonable cost. And unlike many trade proposals, which look good for one team, but as soon as you look at it from the other team's perspective, you're going, well, why in the hell would they do that? In this case, there's actually a reason why in the hell Arizona might do that. That involves the cap floor and also involves their willingness to take on all kinds of stuff as long as it comes with draft choices and other goodies. So it's at least it's an idea of a trade. It would need the involvement of basically three parties: the Oilers, the Coyotes, and the player, Duncan Keith, to all come to terms and say, okay, this works for me, this works for us. And there is a scenario where that might actually work to the advantage of all three, at least until the NHL rules against the Oilers and takes away another draft pick.
Yeah,
there's always that hanging over us like the sword of Damocles.
Yeah, there's nothing in the offing in that regard, though. That's just a joke.
Yeah, I'm kidding on that last part, but it's an interesting idea, and like most interesting ideas in comment sections, the chance of it actually happening are probably under 1%. But what the heck?
Well, if they could get, like, let's say, a player like Dmitry Samorukov or Marcus Niemelainen, Arizona, right, and get to the cap floor, that's not bad incentive to proceed. So the Oilers would be. The Oilers do have kind of they've got a lot of good young defensemen on the farm team. You can't use them all. They can't all be in Edmonton. So you have to make up your mind, and you do have to. They should move one of those pieces if they can't, if they're not anticipating that particular player to be in Edmonton. So could come down to Samorukov or Niemelainen, both left shot defensemen with potential to be the 7th defenseman in Edmonton next winter.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Bruce. Let's move on to the Stuart Skinner scenario. So there's lots of talk right now about maybe Jack Campbell of the Toronto Maple Leafs, who's a 30-year-old goalie, a very good goalie. He's had about 5 good years in a row when you look at AHL and NHL seasons combined. He's been at least average, above average goalie in the AHL and the NHL for 5 seasons in a row. He's 30. He's a pretty good goalie. He's a UFA. I don't know what he would get as a UFA. Seems to me he'd be the most valuable commodity on the UFA market. Some people think it'll be Ville Husso, but I think Campbell's a better bet than Husso, just based on the last 3 or 4 or 5 years. Anyway, my concern is this, that the Oilers, let's say they figure out a way to get Kane. You have McDavid, Draisaitl, Hyman, Nugent Hopkins, Darnell Nurse. You got a lot of big contracts all of a sudden. And you start to pay $4, $5, $6 million a year for a goalie as well, for Jack Campbell, who's going to be looking for a big payday. I think he made $1.6 million or $1.5 million last year.
Yeah.
So he's going to be looking to make some money. What the Oilers have to do is yes, they are in a position to challenge for the Stanley Cup next year. So you got to get another good goalie. If Mike Smith isn't coming back, and there's lots of talk that that's not happening because of the major injuries that he played with all last season. But if Stuart Skinner does pan out and becomes a good goalie, if Philip Broberry pans out and becomes a really good defenseman, if Evan Bouchard becomes an all-star hockey player, which is a possibility, if Dylan Holloway and Ryan McLeod and Kyler Yamamoto become excellent hockey players, Xavier Bourgault, it's just, you can only afford so much in this NHL. And I'm starting to worry with these contracts. If you go, like, I can see the Oilers bringing on one more big contract this summer, Kane or a goalie. If you bring in both, though, on longer term deals, it starts to really handcuff the team in terms of signing some of these younger players. So Stuart Skinner turns out and suddenly you don't have the money to sign him. And this is my concern about, I think they can probably find wiggle room for one guy.
Mm-hmm.
Two, Bruce, that strikes me as a stretch. And I haven't crunched the numbers. I'm just kind of going by feel, just by the number of big contracts we see on this team. But they are adding up. There's a number of them, and you can only have so many. So I'm just looking down the road and thinking, wow, is this really prudent? And if it's not, what else can you do, I guess?
It's particularly an issue at the goaltending position because, there's only one goalie in any given game, right? It's not like you can bury a guy down the lineup, get them both playing or whatever. You don't have a designated hitter where you can use both your catchers like the Blue Jays like to do. You can use one goalie at a time. And you can do something like what Florida Panthers did. I mean, this is an extreme case where they went out and they signed Sergei Bobrovsky, 7 years, $70 million, no movement clause, bonuses, the whole shebang, one of them 4 horsemen of the apocalypse contracts. And now they have Spencer Knight bubbling up in their system. And what the hell are they going to do with the guy? Because they've got Sergei Bobrovsky with 4 years to run at $10 million. And it's Spencer Knight, first of all, I mean, is he even going to get the opportunity to prove what a goalie he is? And then are they going to have the budget that they're going to be able to pay the guy? And both of those are questions, and they may well wind up having to move on from the good young goalie because they've made such a massive commitment to the good older goalie. And it's, I mean, the other solution is what Montreal Canadiens did, which is, sign Carey Price to $10.5 million times 8 years, and then also pay a good contract to the backup goalie, and then have a goaltending budget that runs $14 million. Well, that's going to come out of the rest of your team. So, that's not really a good solution either. So, it sure would be nice if we had a better idea of exactly what Oilers have in Stuart Skinner 4 years into his pro career. All we know is he's got 1 year to run that NHL minimum, and that next year they no longer have waiver options on him. They're going to have to keep him on the team or risk losing him. So it's very likely that he makes the team, very likely that he's a backup goalie, and he plays 20 games, and hopefully by the end of that we have a better idea. And I mean, he won't get expensive until he gets good, let's put it that way. But the scenario where he is the backup to Mike Smith, who has 1 year to run and he's 40 years old, well, at the end of that year, there's an obvious succession plan in place because Smith's contract expires, and now you got the young goalie who's ready to roll. So, for whatever you think of Mike Smith, a plan like that where you have a veteran who's doesn't have a big money contract that stretches on till forever. It gives you a lot more flexibility with that young guy.
Yeah, you're right. Like it's too bad Smith in some ways, it's really too bad he's hurt in a way. If he was healthy, 1 more year of Mike Smith, then you're set, right? You see if Skinner can turn out or not. And if he can, then you're looking for a backup goalie for Stuart Skinner. You're not looking for another starter to compete. So anyway, we'll see what develops there. Jack Campbell may be actually a very good, like I don't have anything against Jack Campbell. He looks like he's a good goalie. And maybe if you don't break the bank on him, I just think like Toronto's losing these players. Like they lost Zach Hyman and Campbell because they got so many big contracts. Well, we're heading in the same direction that Toronto's now in, strikes me. And I just find that a little bit concerning.
Yeah, Darcy Kemper's the other name, of course, that's coming on the market potentially. Colorado might lock him up, but they have 5 important free agents, and they're not going to be able to afford all 5 guys. They've got Nichushkin, Burakovsky, Kadri, and Josh Manson, as well as Darcy Kemper.
Yeah.
And Kemper, I just noticed a thing on Twitter today saying that he had to see a vision specialist something like 3 times a day to retrain his eye that got poked with a stick through the mask in the Nashville series. And then you'll recall that when they played the Oilers, he got hit in the head with a shot in the first game, and he departed for the whole rest of the series with vision problems from that, which how related the two are, who knows? And I mean, I'm a fan of Darcy Kemper, have been since he was a Red Deer Rebel, and I've watched his career with interest, and great for him that he won the Stanley Cup. But I'm not sure that I want to invest a huge future contract in a goalie with double vision. You know, I mean, which puck do you stop? It's kind of a problem. So, I mean, joking aside, though, I mean, you really want to be 100% certain of the guy's, you know, physiological any issues that he might have had to deal with to be sure that they've in fact been dealt with.
Speaking of the last time on the podcast, we were talking about the Oilers maybe trading for Chris Driedger. And unbeknownst to either of us,
Yes.
he was at the World Championships and he hurt his knee and he's out for 8 or 9 months.
Yeah, I saw the game and everything, David, and I should have in the podcast. It sort of crossed my mind, but I thought he's got all summer to heal. But no, it's worse than that, and he's out for deep into next season. He's another victim of the Sergei Bobrovsky contract. He had a great year in Florida, and they just had to move on from him because they couldn't afford him. So they sent him to Seattle.
All right, Bruce, let's move on. Let's start with Zack Cassian, keep, hold, or fold. What's your take? Keep, hold, or fold?
Oh boy. Personally, I'm ready to fold if you can find a way to do it. He's. I just wrote a post on Cass on the Cult of Hockey that's up today. And the big issue with him is his cap hit, his contract. This was a mistake by Ken Holland to sign him at a time where his value was as high as it could be. He was running a real hot shooting streak, having spent basically a calendar year on a line with McDavid and Draisaitl, and just coming out the other end of that, where he, you know, sort of lost that assignment and was on a different line. He had a beat down of Matthew Tkachuk that had everybody happy with him. And at that moment in time, with you know, half the season left to play and the playoffs, where Ken Holland decided now is the time to re-sign him for 4 years at $3.2 million. So a long-term and a hefty cap hit. And the two, of course, in combination are deadly. Well, 2 years into the 4-year contract, he scored 8 goals, and he's you know, not producing any kind of offense. He's you know, as a defensive player, as you and I have noted on many podcasts, he's a fairly iffy defensive player. He does bring the physicality, but not as much as he used to because he's getting beat up. I mean, he spent so much time on IR the last 2 years, and this is partly explaining why his game has tumbled as far as it has, is that he spent 4 different times on IR, and 3 of them were the injury was serious enough that he wound up going to long-term injured reserve, which is basically anything over 24 days. So significant injuries, including 2 this past season that might be classified as concussions, where he got punched and missed time with a head injury in a preseason fight, and then he took a slap shot in the face and broke his jaw with head trauma associated with that. So, I mean, we don't know the medical details. All we know is what we see on the ice, which is a diminished player who's now 31 years old. He's well into that period where a lot of big power forwards tend to lose their edge, and often they fall fairly quickly from their peak to right down the slope, as Oilers fans have seen with Milan Lucic, with James Neal in recent years. And those 2 years, that's 3.2. That's a big investment for a third or fourth line player. And I just don't see the upside. That they've got to find some way to move on, whether it's a trade or a buyout.
I'm in the hold camp with Kassian. Um, I think defensively he's improved as the years have gone on. He doesn't turn over the puck in his own zone on the boards like he used to. He manages it better. I think he's about an average defensive winger on the Oilers. His even strength scoring, points per 60, he had more even strength points per 60 this year than Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, which isn't saying a lot because Nuge has been a weak even strength scorer 2 years running now. But Nuge was at 1.52 per 60. Kassian's at 1.54. Cutter Yamamoto at 1.64. So not much difference between Yamamoto, Kassian, Nugent-Hopkins. Warren Fogel, 1.42. So actually Fogel, I think Fogel was a little better than his numbers. He created a lot more in terms of contributing to grade A shots, and they just didn't go in this year for Fogel. So I think there's a little bit of that at play with Fogel, where Kassian got a bit lucky, I think, in terms of getting more points than probably he deserved based on how many grade A shots he's contributing to. So there was a a slight rumor-ish kind of comment. Bob Stauffer on Oilers Now was talking about where things might go with the Oilers this summer. And in a long list of things that might or might not happen, he mentioned that Zack Cassian and Warren Fogel had played for DJ Smith in junior hockey.
Oh, yeah.
And so Ottawa might be a destination and the idea Connor Brown, who's a winger on the Senators, I think he's got a year left on his deal, might be coming to Edmonton. So I don't know. Warren Fogel had a really good year at even strength in terms of his two-way play. He just didn't put up a lot of points, but I didn't mind him as a third-line winger. He's also pretty pricey. Kassian, the main concern for me is his injuries.
Right.
He only played 58 games this year in the regular season. I thought he actually played better in the playoffs. He was a better player in the playoffs than he had been in the regular season. He cranked it up and did have some good games and played better there. So I'm not crazy about the buyout with Kassian. What I would hope is that they could move him and get better terms on a deal in terms of moving him than the buyout would present for the Oilers. So if the Oilers can move Kassian and not have to retain too much salary, you do it in a heartbeat because he's not a $3.2 million a year player. He's probably more like a $1.5 million a year player, or $2 million a year player at most. At this point, he is a big physical player. I could see a team like Ottawa with a lot of young talent on that team wanting his physicality and that kind of veteran tough guy. Kassian does bring that. He is still a very tough hockey player, an intimidating hockey player. He's an okay bottom line player. I don't think he's a terrible player. He's okay. He just gets paid too much. So I'm kind of that's where I'm at. Hold, see what's being offered. In terms of a buyout, I'd have to think hard about that, Bruce. I'm not. The injuries are a concern that he could fall off a cliff. If he can provide 2 more years of what he just provided, I would be against the buyout. But you have to weigh against that his injury situation, which really did mount this year, and there was a number of fairly, major injuries. Like in terms of him fighting anymore, I just think it's nuts if he's for him to get in any more fights, given
That's a
his
lot of what they're
concussion.
paying for.
And it is. You're right. So, but I don't mind if he doesn't fight. I think he's tough and can just by his hitting. He's an intimidating hockey player and can add to your team. And I think he's an okay two-way hockey player. I don't mind him on your fourth line, but that's a lot of money for a fourth line guy.
So
He can play up now and then,
pay
up
your
the
whole
lineup.
fourth line for less than that.
Well, exactly right. So if they buy him out, I'm not going to be screaming, "Oh, that's madness!" Like, why could you do that? I could see the thinking, but that's not where I would be going with the player. I would be looking to move him because I think he's movable. I think there's a player there, and you just have to retain some money or send an asset with him, and you can move Zack Cassian, and it might not be as bad as the buyout option.
Well, yeah, first choice for sure would be try and move him because the buyout option does have a 4 year. It echoes down the
Uh,
road. They actually would save over 2.5 million in the year to come, and that's very tempting. But only 1.3 million the year after that, and then the 2 years after that, they have a lingering penalty of basically 1 million bucks. So all of the savings would be more or less realized right away. One just odd thing about Cassian, his 1.54 points per 60 is at even strength, and at 5-on-5, which is what I use, he's 1.28 and actually 12th out of 12 Edmonton Oilers forwards last year who played 300 or more minutes. So his production is if he does have some offense, he does not scoring many goals, but he can make a pass now and again. Um,
how
I
can he
just
have
don't.
so many more?
He had
The,
an extra 1 goal and 2 assists in other situations, and it wasn't
what would that be? Four on
overtime.
four? Like,
Wasn't overtime. Might be 4-on-4. Might be delayed penalty. There's ways to get an even strength goal where it isn't straight 5-on-5. And I'm not saying those points don't count. I'm just saying the metric I use is 5-on-5, where there's a goalie in each net, because I do know the empty net goals tend to really confuse the issue. So that's one way to
well, they
to
can.
uh,
Yeah,
make
I guess
those goals.
he didn't score any, I don't think, but he. I like the bigger sample size. I like giving players credit for whatever they've done. So I go with the even strength. And anyway, it's six of one, half of a dozen of another. And I know that most people probably go with a 5-on-5, but I just like the bigger sample. And if someone's done something good, I like to, or bad, if they haven't scored, I like to note that. So he did get those 3 extra points somehow. I can't imagine how, because maybe four. He hardly played. Maybe he played some 4-on-4 and scored then. All right, Bruce Fogel. I'll go first on Fogel.
Sure.
He's 2.75 million. His point even strength or his five, yeah, his even strength point production 1.42 is really mediocre. Um, it's third line winger ish maybe, but I liked his play, especially as the regular season went on. He is a physical player, goes hard to the net. He was disappointing in the playoffs. He didn't step up. I predicted that he was going to. I was wrong, incorrect in that. I based that on the fact that he had created a lot of grade A shots in the regular season. They just weren't going in. And they continued to not go in the playoffs. And in fact, he created less. He was less good in the playoffs than he had been in the regular season. He was not as effective a hockey player, just slightly less effective. But so I don't mind the player at all. I think there's a NHL third line winger there. I wouldn't be surprised next year he goes to a team, could be the Oilers, whatever team he's on. If he got 15 goals and 30 points, most of that even strength, or 17 goals and 12 assists, something like that, and a useful big physical player who doesn't kill you defensively, who's okay defensively. Um, Warren Fogel's a useful NHL hockey player. He's paid $2.75 million this year, next year. That's below the NHL average. So it's not like he's grossly overpaid if he's a third line winger, um, achieving at that level, which I expect. So I'm I'm in the hold category with him as well. You have to just see what the offer is, see who wants him, see if someone, could Dylan Holloway, for instance, step in and give you everything that Warren Foegele did this year with the Oilers, I think that's a really good bet, and cheaper bet than Warren Foegele. So you have this possibility of Holloway. You've got Raphael Lavoie, who's a big tough winger, who played in the AHL last year. He's probably needs another at least half year in the AHL.
Definitely.
But he's a possibility. And then there's all the whole free agent market this summer. And there's lots of players. There's always lots of players. Could you get someone to come in who's earning $1 million a year and gave you what Warren Foegele did in the playoffs and the regular season last year? Well, you'd probably come close, and it would free up money for a Kane and maybe for a goalie. So again, with Fogel, I don't think you have to eat anything to move the contract. I think you could probably find a team who will take him on. You might not get anything in return, much in return, but I don't think he's I don't think he's a negative cap territory necessarily. He's really close to that, but I don't think he's just on the cusp of it. So I don't think you're gonna have to give up a good draft pick or any draft pick at all to move him. Maybe you get something back, a low round draft pick in return for Warren Foegele, like a 6th rounder or 5th rounder, something like that. That's the kind of deal I would expect there. Where are you at?
They certainly acquired him to fix an ongoing problem in the bottom 6. They didn't have just enough NHL class players.
Yeah.
And he came in with all of that reputation. His season, like his point production, 12 goals, 14 assists, most of it at even strength, is kind of in line with sort of decent production for a bottom sixer. He was a -9 on the season. Part of that was, I don't know if you want to call it luck, but the percentages were against him. Like the Oilers actually carried the play to a small degree when he was on the ice. But the goals weren't going in, and his PDO was poor, meaning the other team had a significantly higher shooting percentage when he was on the ice than the Oilers did. Playoffs, though, 13 games. He got, after being the only Oiler to play all 82, he got scratched for 3 games in the playoffs. The 13 he did play, no goals, 1 assist, -5. Dead heat with Josh Archibald. And, you expect more. And you certainly expect more, 2.75 million. And again, it's a case of not only did he get a higher cap hit, but he got a longer term than the standard 2 years or even 1 year deal that Holland gave up. Well, Fogel got 3 years, so he's got 2 years to run at that price. And one issue with him, like Zack Cassian, is he doesn't play special teams. A little bit second power play unit, but seconds a game kind of thing. And none at all on the penalty kill. So all of the value in that contract, in each case, around $3 million at even strength, playing, not top 6 feature minutes. The guy needs to do a lot in that time, and so I'm in the whole camp. Like you don't just get rid of the guy. He is an NHL player, and he did have his. He had some really good games where he was all over the puck. And then a lot of other games where he was kind of vanilla, but he wasn't really hurting the team. But the contract's a bit rich, but it's there. I think there would be far less reason for them to move on from this player than from Kassian, in my opinion.
In the playoffs, I didn't think he was a defensive liability. That's what our numbers are telling us. He didn't make a lot of mistakes on grade A shots against. He just didn't create a lot on the attack. And what I'm concerned with is a bit of recency bias, like the same thing we're experiencing with Puljujarvi, where he had a weak playoff. So you have these players who disappointed in the playoffs, and they really did. Like there are 2 wingers who just didn't get it done and needed to do more. But if they had, I don't think we'd be having they were both pretty good in the regular season. Puljujarvi better than Fogel, but Fogel not bad. And even in the regular season, Bruce, so we track who gets the grade A shots on the team. So Fogel, in terms of, on average for the whole team, in terms of our counting of grade A shots this year, Bruce, 24% of grade A shots went in the net for goals this year, 24%. So Fogel and Puljujarvi, though, were 2 of the for Puljujarvi, just 16% of his grade A shots went in. And for Fogel, it was 17%. Compare that to Evander Kane, 31%. Leon Draisaitl, 30%. Connor McDavid, 23%. Zach Hyman, 22%. Kailer Yamamoto, 23%. So McDavid and Hyman and Yamamoto are kind of right on the mark, around 24%, 25%. Draisaitl's above that. Well, he's always above that because he's such a great shooter.
Mm-hmm.
Evander Kane, well, you'd have to see, did he just get hot? Was there something about his scoring chances? Were they right close to the net set up by Connor McDavid? So they were basically gimme shots that he could replicate that really high shooting percentage on grade A shots. There's a possibility, but with Puljujarvi and Fogel, what comes to mind with both those players is the number of chances they had where they just were right in there and they couldn't score. And some of that was them not being great snipers. Neither of them's a great sniper. Some of it was just bad puck luck. They could have easily had either of these players could have easily had 3 or 4 or 5 more goals this year, I think, with slightly different puck luck. If you're looking at a Warren Foegele who scored 17 goals, or a Jesse Puljujarvi who scored 19 or 20 goals this year, the conversation's different. And that's just about. And the only thing that would be different there would be different puck luck, just a slight movement on 5 different shots, just slight different timing on 5 different shots. It comes down to whether you move the player or not. So you have to be very careful, I think, in moving these players because they did have bad puck luck in the regular season, I think, and the recency bias of the playoffs. So this gives me. If Puljujarvi comes back and Fogel comes back, I'm going to be okay with that. Mm-hmm. Because of these are the reasons I'm going to be okay, because I think these are NHL hockey players. Fogel's a third line winger. Puljujarvi's a top 6 winger in my view. So, and you move on from these guys, you may regret it. That's my only point with both of them.
Yeah, well, Fogel definitely produced less than you would expect from the other numbers, including our scoring chance numbers, and some of that is, as you suggest, just shooting talent. You got an above-average sniper; he's going to pot more of the same number of chances than an average or a below-average sniper as Puljujarvi and Fogel. Maybe they're just below average. Maybe they just had a run of sustained poor luck that in a different season would just go away. Or maybe they're like Draisaitl, but in the opposite direction, that you'd see the same pattern emerge in the next season and the one beyond that because they're, just poor shooters. I don't know that we've seen enough to make that statement definitively, but shooting talent's part of it. I would also be interested to know, for instance, for Evander Kane and his 31%, well, what percent of his chances did we judge as being 5 alarm as opposed to grade A chances? Like, did he have a high proportion of really great chances and he did a good job of burying those? Or was it more he was just getting sort of garden variety grade A shots, but his great wrist shot or whatever was beating goalies? And that would involve another layer of analysis, and I don't think we have that tool because we only started doing the 5 alarm partway through the season.
You're right. So we don't have that for full season data on that. We don't even have it for Kane's full amount of time. So I think that Kane's number of 5 alarm shots were much higher. Now, Puljujarvi had a lot of 5 alarm shots though too. They were playing with McDavid, both of them. If Puljujarvi had cashed in his chances at the same rate, his grade A shots at the same rate as Kane, he would have had 28 goals this year, Bruce. So that's what shooting talent and good puck luck will do for a player. Like, yes, Puljujarvi scored 28 goals this year. If that he would not be moved right now. So, but it didn't happen, right? It didn't happen. So
yeah, the odd
just
thing,
left guessing.
Return to the right wingers for just a second. The odd thing was last year was that the 2 lowest paid right wingers were the 2 that wound up playing in the top 6 that had the best stats, most ice time, the best underlying numbers, like everything. It was Yamamoto and Puljujarvi, each at 1.175 million cap hit, both expired. And then the three guys above him, well, thankfully, at least two of them are expired. And Kyle Turris at 1.65 million and Josh Archibald at 1.5 million. Both guys you would think will be moving on, or if they do decide to retain Archibald, which wouldn't totally shock me, but surely it would be at a significantly lower figure than 1.5. And only Kassian has a contract that's ongoing, and of course that's the most expensive one.
Yeah.
I have a saying, I've never shared it before. It's a riff on Billie Jean King when she said, "Winning is fleeting, losing is forever." And my take is value contracts are fleeting, boat anchors are forever.
I like it, Bruce. I like it. It's got some staying power. That suggestion. Bruce, I have an appointment I got to get to,
Yep.
so we'll leave it there. Bruce, thanks for talking today.
All right. Thanks for listening, everyone.
And in the meantime, and in between times, this has been another edition of the Cult of Hockey podcast.